like, doesn't sound like fun. So I did more research on like, okay, what is engineering? I decided to become an electrical engineer. And as I went on, I kept taking on research areas that I thought would be fun that just weren't when I actually pursued them. Fast forward, when I landed in graduate school, the first project that we did at MIT was around dance and robotics. And so we crafted this whole activity where you could put sensors on your body and you could change the animation, you could change the sound, you could change the lighting, you could do all of this cool stuff with movement in your body. And so for me, it was like, ooh, all right, maybe I haven't been doing this through dance, but I've been dancing forever now. So I can actually incorporate not just the idea that I want to develop computational technologies, but also these other aspects of myself into the work. And so from then on, it was like fair game.
There are a number of avenues that brought me where I am today. Part of it is just my upbringing, that my mother was very politically active and my father was an electrical engineer. And so somehow I am this blend of politically progressive activist, nerdy, techie computer scientist. And then when I went to college, I was studying mathematics, and I was advised by a family friend that if the great irony is, he said, if you go into pure mathematics, all you can do is teach. But if you go into applied mathematics, you can solve really interesting problems. So I have become an academic who tries to look at interesting problems. And increasingly over time, I've just become really interested in how we can use technology to make people's lives better. Because to me, that's what's so wonderful about computer science, is that we actually have the capability to really use technology to improve people's lives.
I had school district adopted curriculum that was being used in computer science. I was given the keys to the computer lab and was told good luck. And there was no curriculum available for me. I had to go find something that was available that was the closest match of what I could find, but it wasn't really the type of materials that I knew would bring the subject alive for students. And so that was the first moment where I thought, hey, there's a real need here for curricular resources, just like we're trying to do in mathematics and other subjects, to make sure that it's inclusive and engaging for students. So that became one of my impetus to think, okay, well, what can we do with professional development for computer science teachers so that they can use effective pedagogy, adopt curriculum that is engaging for their students, and be prepared to broaden participation in computing.
Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining today's Identity and Computing Lecture Series event. This is our conversation with the AiiCE Student Advisory Board. Today, we're considering identity and inclusion in computing spaces. At any time during the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to submit your questions. To do so, just type your question into the Q&A at the bottom of the control panel. As time allows, we'll address as many questions as we can, and we'll be recording this webinar, and we'll share the link to the webinar on our AiiCE website tomorrow afternoon. Thank you. I'd now like to introduce our panelists, who include 6 members of the AiiCE Student Advisory Board. Bridget Aguirre is a 4th-year undergraduate student at UC Berkeley, pursuing her BS in electrical engineering and computer science. She's interested in AI and machine learning and culturally responsible computing education. In her free time, Bridget enjoys popular culture discourse, online shopping, and being with her friends and family. Kiana Bolante is a 3rd-year undergraduate student from the University of Washington in Seattle. She is studying computer science and has been involved with AiiCE and computing education research since her 1st year in college. Kiana is currently preparing her paper and talk to present at SIGSE 2024. She's going to detail her experience in creating a social computing curriculum for secondary level education. In her free time, she loves to crochet, read, and spend time with her 2 dogs. Kiara DeLand is a third-year undergraduate student at Duke University, majoring in computer science. Her primary area of interest is inclusive computing education. Currently, Kiara is working on developing a training course for undergraduate teaching assistants at Duke. Kiara is also a teaching assistant herself, and in her free time, she enjoys solving puzzles and spending time with her cats. Sonia Ferraduni is an MS student at the University of Washington. As an undergraduate, she studied computer science, data science, and sociology, and graduated in 2022. Currently, Sonia is researching 3 different branches of computer science: AI bias, ethics, fairness, and governance, common sense reasoning and development in AI, and designing equitable pedagogies in curricular and computer science curricula. Rosa Gao is a junior at Johns Hopkins University. She's majoring in computer science with 2 majors in applied math and statistics and business. Her current interests include software engineering and computer security and privacy. In Rosa's free time, she likes to dance, listen to podcasts, and watch comedy shows. Jabari Kwesi received his BS in computer science from Duke University in 2023 and returned to join the interdisciplinary security, privacy, and interaction research lab as a PhD student. His current interests include studying the implementation and effects of data collection and surveillance technologies in Black communities in America. In Jabari's free time, he enjoys playing and watching basketball, as well as spending time with family and friends. Our moderator today is Dr. Shawnee Daly, Backbone Director for the Alliance for Identity Inclusive Computing Education. Welcome, panelists, and welcome, Dr. Daly.
All right. It's so good to see you all and to have all of our audience here today. We have a bunch of questions that we went ahead and put together, our audience, so you know, but we will make time, as Minerva said, for questions. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to read a question. I'm going to ask a couple of our panelists to respond to each question, and we'll just move through. All right. All right. So first question, what are some of the specific challenges related to a lack of inclusion and equity faced by students in academic spaces? And I'm going to pitch this one first to Jabari and then to Kiana, please.
Thank you, Dr. Daly. I'd like to start off by saying thank you, Minerva, for that great introduction. To answer this question, I think there are a bunch of different ways that you could talk about specific ways that challenges due to a lack of inclusion and equity manifest themselves. I feel like for myself, I'm most comfortable speaking about a lack of role models and relevant learning experiences for students from groups that might be underrepresented or minoritized in computing. This can be considered a symptom of a lack of inclusion in academia, but it manifests itself into an effect when a low number of figures from these groups go on and graduate to do this work in industry and academia as professors and faculty. So in that way, I feel like it's kind of a self-fulfilling loop, you know what I'm saying? The students that aren't necessarily comfortable being a part of this group, or they don't feel comfortable going and doing this work professionally. And so the students that come after them, well, they don't see too many people that look like themselves, and they don't necessarily feel comfortable in these environments. I feel like the representation being there or not being there to guide these students and help themselves see themselves in these roles are a big part of the reason why these roles remain dominated by overrepresented and majoritized groups. So there's a lot of nuance to the issue, a lot of different ways that you could talk about it. I personally feel like it's a lot of value in speaking on it.
Yeah, and I believe I was also picked to answer this question. So for this, I think, yes, definitely lack of representation is a huge problem. And to add on to that, I also feel like the lack of conversation surrounding this topic, and also, I guess, just educational resources or awareness of resources for people who might be affected by the lack of inclusion within academic spaces or in computing in general. Because for me specifically, like, I personally didn't know about concepts like microaggressions or the model minority myth until I guess later on in my academic career. And I felt like learning about all of those different topics really helped make me understand my own feelings of, what I was feeling going through this lack of inclusion and equity in certain spaces. So I feel like, expanding these resources and also raising awareness on these resources is something that we could definitely move towards in the future. Because I feel like there definitely are people, like AiiCE and other organizations that are creating these welcoming spaces and resources. And just another layer is just outreach to people who might not be able to find these or to be able to find these right away, these resources and communities right away, just making sure that we're expanding our audience as much as possible.
Awesome. Thank you both. So to Kiara and Bridget, can you share personal experiences where inclusivity was lacking in an academic setting? And how have these challenges impacted your experiences or engagement?
Yes, thank you for the question. So I think one experience that maybe a lot of us has faced is at the beginning of our CS journey, maybe as freshmen, we started seeing like a lot of women of color, a lot of minorities in CS feeling comfortable in the environment. But as we go up into more advanced courses, like that tends to drop off. So personally, what's happened for me is that I've been in high-level CS classes and I've noticed that in a class of around 80 people, I was only one of 3 women of color. And that makes it really difficult, not only in terms of like my personal mindset and my personal like ability to believe in my success, but it also affects like the rhetoric around group work. So I've also noticed that when I'm in groups of predominantly males, I will find that my voice tends to kind of be on the back burner. Or I've also noticed that I am put into the roles where I'm doing more of the like of the presentation work or even like the front end work, regardless of my personal abilities or my preferences. So I think that's a really big issue in uninclusive spaces.
I was going to echo that point, like surrounding group work, especially at my university. There's been a lot of problems with like specifically Black students not being able to find groups of students to work with just because other students like just don't want to work with us or like avoid sitting at the same table as us. And those problems are like really kind of, it's seemingly hard to fight because it's explicit racism that's causing people to not want to work with certain groups of people. But there have been like certain interventions that we've been working at my school. Like we have this new like study group kind of formation system where we create study groups for students in classes, and it makes sure that students aren't alone in their identity when we create these groups, so that hopefully they won't feel like the singular voice who has to represent themselves. And so also they can find group members to work with, because still like this issue has persisted for a very long time. And many of my like personal friends have been affected by just like not being able to find students to work with, which is crucial to success in computer science.
Thank you both. I resonate with that, even though it was 20 years ago when I was in these spaces as a student, and this kind of idea of people dropping off at the upper levels and that impacting who's in the room when it's time to pick those groups. For sure, those things are interrelated. So I want to push us forward a bit and ask Sonia and Rosa on this next question. What are the current concerns or challenges that weigh heavily on your minds? So if you consider the current landscape, like what things do you consider most pressing or urgent as it relates to belonging and inclusion?
So for me personally, I wish I can see more people who share my experiences, because for me, I'm an international student pursuing college education in the States. So sometimes when it comes to internships, when it comes to research opportunities on campus, I have to navigate like obtaining work authorization, like reaching out to the international student office. Sometimes the resources are there, but I wish there were people like mentors or like upperclassmen, also international students who can help me with navigating all of these. So I think right now, one thing I wish that the computing space could work as it comes to diversity and inclusion is like to build more communities where people can find others who share their experiences.
For me, it definitely follows what Rosa says. And it's not just like that there should be more people of like marginalized or diverse identities in computing, but like a really great anecdote for what needs to be done is that our situations actually need to be taken account seriously and needs to be embedded in the system. For example, like when the you know Russia-Ukraine war started a couple of years ago, it was all over UW News. The director of the Allen School at the UW sent emails, um, you know, department wide, and sent emails to like Ukrainian students saying like, oh, if you need help, you know, we're there for you and all this stuff. But then when similar things happened with the human rights abuses in Iran, it was just radio silence. And then there was the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria, and I had to write an article that literally said UW does not care about brown students, and here's why: because it's radio silence when things happen to us. And my Turkish friend, when she asked the director of the Allen School, like, why did you not send an email out for us, or why are you not extending the same resources that you did to Ukrainian students? So we know you can extend resources to students of like these backgrounds. She said, well, if I write an email for this thing, then I'll have to write an email for everything. So then why'd you write an email for Ukraine to begin with? Like you opened up the floodgates, and there's like a clear, honestly, like racism that is involved with this, where it's only certain types of people, certain groups of people that have these accommodations for them and are, again, embedded in the system to succeed, and other identities just are, I guess, expected to fail and not given the same accommodations.
Thank you both. So this idea of equitable application of care is what I'm hearing from you all. So let me ask Bridget and Kiana on this one. Can you discuss any initiatives or projects that address issues of identity and inclusion in computing spaces that you believe have worked particularly well?
Yeah, so actually, as a part of students on the advisory board, we all come up with our own initiatives or projects to work on that revolve around this topic. So I know a lot of students are working on maybe writing articles or creating info sessions to go over this topic. And I feel like as we go through that, we'll see a lot of great progress. But I guess some personal things that I've seen is, for example, in my school, in a club I'm a part of, we have a mentorship program where we connect upperclassmen with upperclassmen with underclassmen. And some of the things that we ask for in the matching process are things revolving around their identity, if they feel more comfortable connecting with other students who revolve around the same identity, to kind of grow that community on a personal level and be able to connect with somebody that they might not see as outwardly in a computing education space. And also just thinking about some of the work I've done with curriculum design. Like I mentioned in my introduction, I have created a social computing curriculum. And as a part of this, I really highlight cultural responsive pedagogy in some of my lessons. So connecting students' interests, identities, backgrounds to what they're learning. And I feel like I've seen a lot of engagement from students in that way. So I think kind of tying in that, idea of connecting people and also, tying in their interests into what they're learning are great ways to foster a more inclusive environment.
kind of go along with that. I think fostering community is just really important. Like I previously mentioned, I worked on like a research project in which we create study groups for students in really large courses in CS at my school. We found that, this like intervention was created just to address the barriers that many students face. So like creating community. And we found that students have been largely been like happy, shared positive results when they like frequently meet with these study groups that we provide them with. So I think things like that like create community are really valuable for students. And I also just like want to shout out like student organizations. Like there's a lot in my campus, like for example, like the NESB chapter, like the Black Engineering chapter, or like the Association for Women in CS that's at my school. Like they do a lot of work surrounding like community building. Like I know our NESB chapter, we have our own tutoring program in which we pair like Black tutors with Black students to help them in their like large computer science or engineering courses. So I feel like students are doing a lot of the work in just creating space for themselves and trying to create positive change within their college campuses. So if anyone is like wanting to get involved like a student, I would really recommend like student organizations because they do like affect really positive change.
Thank you both for that. So since you brought up student organizations, Kiara, can you talk a little bit about your experiences?
Yeah, so actually, we have a student organization here at Duke University called DTech, and it's pretty much devoted to non-males in tech. And there's a lot of support there there's also support with peer advisors. So there tends to be, again, as Kiana was saying, like upperclassmen and underclassmen who kind of connect together in big groups and just have like social connection there. But there's also connections with recruiters, and there's actually like a specified job website for women in STEM to actually get internships with more success than just applying separately. So that's a really important initiative that we have going on over here at Duke.
Thank you so much. Jabari and Rosa, how can students take an active role in promoting identity inclusive practices within their own communities?
Absolutely. I think that's a very important question to address and to be able to internalize. I think at the root of it, at the root of my answer, I would say everything comes down to intentionality, at the level that we're at right now, nothing happens by accident. Nobody gets to this level of education by mistake. Everything has to be deliberate. And so I think when we're addressing the ways that we as students, our colleagues, and the people around us can contribute to making a more inclusive environment, it's important to keep in mind that inclusivity has many different representations. So it doesn't necessarily have to be you going out your way to do something you're not comfortable with, or you're giving up your spot in one place for somebody that you think deserves it more based on a demographic or a group they belong to more. It could be as simple as having a conversation. It could be as simple as not being dismissive to somebody that's in the group that you're assigned in the class. You know what I'm saying? It could be all these different ways where you're being intentional about not necessarily being exclusive, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like people should have that should be intentionally spread the awareness regarding diversity and inclusion. I remember this semester in the Women in Computer Science, we had a diversity DEI workshop where we talked about in addition to IQ and EQ, there's a notion of cultural intelligence. So it's like people need to be able to identify some of the micro inequities, microaggressions when it comes to academia, when it comes to workplace. So this kind of discussion is really important. And it's not too complicated. It's just like students need to have the awareness to educate themselves and their peers regarding those topics.
Yeah, I like this idea of it. Maybe it's not some big thing that you do, but just in everyday practice, being really intentional. about how you move in these spaces. I have an appreciation for that. So Sonia and Kiana, what advice would you give fellow students facing challenges related to identity and inclusion in computing?
I would say if you're looking for space, make your own space and people will come to it. So for example, in my freshman year, there was like barely any diversity. I mean, there really was no diversity club in the UW Allen School. There was just like ACMW, but I went to one meeting and no offense, but it was just like white feminism. Like there wasn't really any discussion of like intersectionality. It was just like, oh yeah, women in tech, and we're gonna get really fancy corporate jobs, and we're gonna, climb the social ladder and like live in our ivory towers and not care about anybody else. And it just like really turned me away. And I knew I wasn't alone because I discussed this with like my mentor in the Allen School at the time, who was one grade above me, and she had another mentor who was my grade as well. And all three of us, we were discussing this. And we were like, we should make our own club. So we made the Gen 1 club, which is essentially for first generation students to the Allen School. So especially like if you have like if you come from like an immigrant background or your parents were immigrants, it was really great for people like that who I know felt really isolated to the area. And once we created that, we were able to talk about the resources that we want to talk about, because a lot of first generation students like myself, for instance, at that time, I was low income. So we talked about like low income first generation students and these sort of like intersectional identities, because I know that we weren't the only ones. And we were also able to like break in that space, because I feel like talking about being low income or talking about how to apply for FAFSA and like scholarships and all this stuff was really looked down on in such a, not just like corporate like tech world, but even the culture of that like community back then was just like really, it was really coarse and really dismissive of people of diverse backgrounds. And we were just able to like really systemically change and be able to talk about it.
Yeah, for me, I feel like something that helped me a lot was really shifting my mindset. I guess what this looks like specifically is, like for example, when I first went into UW, I came in with not much coding experience. I already identified as a minority within the computing field, and I felt like I was comparing myself a lot with my peers. So like kind of changing that mindset within social comparison of not necessarily replication or seeing students that I should necessarily strive to be like, even though we had different backgrounds coming into the field, but rather more as like maybe inspiration or collaboration or just people that I can learn from, and really focus on my own personal growth rather than comparing myself to other people and what I could be in a way. So shifting that mindset to really focus on my own personal growth was really big. And, just also thinking about my own space, adding on to what Sonia said in terms of like, creating your own space and how that mindset, what that might look like is just really seeing the own value in your own voice. I feel like my time in college really taught me that my voice is truly my most strongest asset and my strongest power, and that my personal experiences, my ideas, my opinions are things that truly nobody could really take away from me. And it's something that I should leverage and try to talk about as much as possible in spaces. I think that mindset is really what guided me to being a part of AiiCE or talking in panels like these, or pursuing TAing, where I could talk about my experience with other students, or being a part of student groups. And I think it's just all in the mindset that you have that will really help you, I guess, shift what you can accomplish, and really helped me personally kind of break out of that little shell that I felt like I was in because of identities and how inclusivity is right now within computing.
Awesome. Thank you both. So similarly, and this I'll pitch to Bridget and Kiara. What advice would you give to educators and administrators looking to improve inclusivity in their computing programs?
What I would say is that we already know that inclusivity is a problem. So like there needs to be like work done. Like we all need to, like administrators, educators need to actively work on like making sure that students are supported. It's not like even like just because you're not getting reports of bad things happening doesn't mean bad things aren't happening. And it's also like these inclusivity issues aren't just like like a pipeline problem. Like there's different ways that we in higher education can make our coursework more inclusive. So like just each semester, just thinking like how can you improve maybe your syllabus or your curriculum to be more inclusive to like students of all backgrounds, because students learn differently. You know, like there are ways like each semester you can take to improve your course. And do students see you as someone who they can come up to and talk to about these issues? I think it's important to make yourself as a resource. So if something does like come up, students know that they could talk to someone, because a lot of the times things just get swept under the rug because the student thinks that no one will care. And are there ways to like temperature check like how the environment is going in your course? And also like an interesting problem I think is like how can we make like the curriculum itself, like computer science coursework, more inclusive? Like there must be a way we can shape like change our curriculum so that grades are not based on like prior experience in computing, or how we can include like diverse perspectives, diverse ideas within like our homework problems in our lectures. And I think that's something that we could all work towards.
Yeah, and just jumping off of what Bridget said, I do want to stress just like creating that inclusive environment in your classroom is like one of the most important things. And then going on to even just the like actual like curriculum side, going off of like things I've experienced in classrooms that have actually affected me for the better, I believe, is like one, highlighting the roles that minorities have had in CS. So I've taken classes where at the end of the day, for like 5 minutes, we'll just talk about someone important in CS. And a lot of times teachers would stress like, this person's like culture and heritage, and often they would be minorities. And sometimes they would like relate to me a lot. And that was very like inspiring to see. Also, just when discussing algorithms in general, I think highlighting like the negative consequences they can have, especially in terms of like algorithmic bias and things like that, is super important. I remember I was taking a class on web development, and my teacher made it mandatory that all our websites would be visible to people who are colorblind. And even after I've taken that class, I've ensured that every single project I've made has been accessible for people who are like colorblind, even like hard of vision, hard of hearing. Like, I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind.
Thank you both. So Jabari and Rosa, let's expand to the broader computing community, thinking about industry professionals and beyond. How can they contribute to creating more inclusive computing spaces?
Absolutely. I think one of the most valuable courses I had the opportunity to take during my undergraduate tenure at Duke was a course where it was outside of the core curriculum of computer science, so it wasn't anything super technical, but we had the opportunity to have conversations with particular industry professionals in different roles, so software engineers, project managers, program managers, people of those nature. In one particular class, I remember the professor had an excellent conversation with the software engineer who just so happened to be a Black woman. And it was a very, very powerful experience because insofar as I can remember, that was the first time in that course where we talked to a Black woman in a role like software engineering. And it was pretty hard for me to think of another time where I had the opportunity to speak to a Black woman software engineer. So after that course, I reached out to her, sent her an email, and we were just sharing some information about her experience, about my experience in academia. It was very helpful. Like I've been building on these past couple of minutes in this panel to see somebody who understands what you're talking about when you speak about certain experiences, both in academia and outside of that, your experience just surrounding computing. So I think that one of the most effective ways to help the broader computing community sort of establish that degree of inclusivity and equity is to look to establish partnerships with industry professionals, where there's the sharing of real world experiences, providing of mentorship, and really just this ability for students to see themselves represented in these roles. You understand?
Yeah, I think there are definitely a lot of things the industry and higher education institutions can do. First is they can always found research into the demographics of their spaces to see like what kind of voices are lacking at their space, what kind of representation they need to increase. And like those research can really help them expose some of the underlying issues regarding identity, regarding diversity. And also, especially for the education institutions, I remember there's a course here at Hopkins that is like mandatory to all CS majors is computer ethics. I remember we discussed things like algorithmic biases and like issues with people with a disability, people with like limited access to technologies. I think those things are really important for those CS students to keep in mind as they go on to work in the industry, go on to like contribute to the academia. Like those kind of, once they have this knowledge, they can really pay more attention to some of the identity related things that they may not be aware of had they not taken those courses.
Awesome. So I'm actually gonna pitch this last one to everybody. So we're gonna go Kiara, Bridget, Sonia, Rosa, Jabari, and then Kiana. All right. Let's just talk about ideal, right? How do you envision what inclusive computing education looks like in the future?
Okay, thank you for the question. So I I think the most important thing is just like a highlighting of minority voices and in education where like everyone has a say in what's being taught and like what's being learned about. I think just like more openness, even just to hear the opinions of like minorities in CS. Like if we think of like Timnit Greybrew or like lack of recruiting at HBCUs, like things like that need to be changed. And we need to just stress minority voices 100%.
Yeah, I would say an ideal scenario, it's like computer science, computing education is something that, everyone of like from all backgrounds wants to pursue at like equal rates. So just starting from like K through 12, we have, underrepresented minority students, we have like gender minority students who just are interested in learning and computing because they see powerful people who look like them in the workforce, and they see people who look like them in TV who are in computing. Like an education that fosters that love that we all have like here on this call for computing, and kind of like makes everyone feel welcome like in their identity. That would be like pretty ideal scenario. And in terms of like computing education, like specifically, I would want to make sure that like no one's penalized for like not having prior experience with coding. I think that could be like a more like realistic goal to work for, like in the short term, just making sure that people are free to explore computing at no matter what age they are at, and they feel welcome no matter what their background is, while taking like a computer science class or like an online course or like watching a YouTube video.
Sonia?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. Just your ideal scenario for what the inclusive future of computing education looks like.
I think that computing education should definitely cater to what I would call like the most vulnerable case or the most vulnerable identity of students. Because once you cater for like the most marginalized, especially like intersectionally marginalized, then every other identity of like dominant or majority groups will also be catered to. I think this was like in a research study done, I don't know how long ago, about in like a sociology paper that saw that those who, like, for example, if people who were disabled had their accommodations met, then those who were able-bodied would also feel included, also have all their needs met. So I think that's like the future of CS education.
I think in the ideal scenario, people keep caring. So it's like they follow up on existing initiatives to identify what has been done well, what aspects could be improved, so that we can like fix what we did wrong and then expand those successful initiatives to broader areas to increase representation regarding identities. So yeah, just keep bringing up discussions regarding diversity, to keep caring about people who might not be well represented in the mainstream academia and industry.
Absolutely. I think my colleagues and fellow panelists have brought up some great ideas so far. I would just like to add that while it's super important to talk about the inclusion of our diverse population, I also think it's just as important to talk about inclusivity when you're talking about the range of ideas that's covered in the curriculum. I think that computing is largely a very technical, quantitative field. I believe that being able to have a diverse population naturally leads to a diverse set of ideas. So you're thinking, well, if we create this technology, how is the implementation going to affect this group of people when we deploy it in the real world? How is this going to be utilized by this demographic right here? I believe that when we talk about inclusivity, it's very important to talk about the inclusivity of various ideas generally produced by people that come from diverse backgrounds or are more familiar with different demographic groups and things of that nature. So talking about in an ideal world, what computing education will look like, I think it's something that's very interdisciplinary, multifaceted, and has all different elements from all different demographic groups and everybody that's affected by technology. Technology isn't created and implemented in a vacuum. These things are going out to affect real people in the real world. So it's very important to make sure that our education reflects that moving forward.
Yeah, I absolutely love what everybody has added to this conversation for so far. And I think just something to add on to that is just, a world where, myself or my student peers don't have to really overthink their place in computing. Like if I am in a classroom setting, I don't have to overthink, or like immediately think how many women are in this room right now? Who can I gravitate towards? Who could be my support system? Or, am I presenting myself or dressing too femininely? Like, will that change how other people think of me? Just in a world where I don't have to overthink all of those actions, I think it says a lot about, where inclusivity is in computing and, just overall a world where people don't have to second guess their sense of belonging within a field.
You are amazing. What we regularly tell you. Thank you for answering those questions and painting a vision for what computing education can look like in the future, as well as your experiences. I'm going to start looking at the Q&A now. And for these, just feel free to jump in if there's one, and don't be shy. Just immediately unmute if you're feeling a question. So this one is related to faculty, and you can, this can be based on your personal experiences. What are the best approaches for faculty to ensure students feel welcome across their identities?
I think it can be something as simple as asking for what kind of pronouns they would prefer, have like a tag with their names and their like pronouns written at the beginning of the course, something simple as that.
Yeah, I heavily agree with Rosa. As a teaching assistant, we're always taught like learn your students' names. I think that's a big thing. And I know that might be hard with bigger lectures, but at least knowing the names of like some of your more frequent students or even students that go to office hours, And then also just making sure that maybe in the first day of lecture, you just make yourself clear as being a safe space for students to come to, regardless of if their questions are academic or if their concerns are more even just for the future, like, oh, like, what do I need to like do to be in the CS space? Like, oh, like, I don't fit in, like, can you help me? Something like that. Just make yourself open for students to talk to.
I would say that make sure you're not enforcing unfair power dynamic. It's all right to not know things when it comes to your student. It's not all right to go through a whole year mispronouncing the student's name because you never asked them how to pronounce it properly. I feel like things as small as that are really important to be able to not only illustrate to your students that you're there for them, but that it's cool to acknowledge that you don't know certain things, you know what I'm saying? It's all right to be able to ask for proper pronunciation, things like that. Could be minor, but makes a long difference in the long run, you know what I'm saying?
Any other thoughts? All right, so another question. So the question is, can justice principles be integrated into inclusive computer science teaching and learning? How would that look to you?
So if I'm understanding the problem or the question properly, we're talking about things such as equality, fairness, justice, things like that. I think those are foundational for all healthy and respectful interactions. But if we're talking specifically about inclusive computer science, teaching and learning, the foundation of equality is treating everybody the same. Foundation of fairness is making sure people are treated justly and impartially. So I think those are tenets that aren't necessarily difficult to incorporate when you're teaching a large or small group of students. Just make sure that everybody feels like they're treated justly, impartially, fairly. Make sure that people don't feel that if they're being treated in a particular way that they're not comfortable with, they can't come to you and express that. Make sure that you keep your environment open and you're always open to criticism and feedback about your teaching methods. Understand that people are different. People are different. People are individuals and everybody has their own preferences. So when you're trying to establish a foundation for everybody to come into your space and learn, understand that everybody does that differently. You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely, justice can be integrated into computer science teaching. Like as of right now, I feel like computer science is kind of like we're taught everything like happens just in its own computer science world, like in a vacuum. Like there's no implications of any of the algorithms that you're writing. I think like introducing like prediction algorithm or like where data sets come from into your curriculum is important and kind of like um, kind of contextualizing what students are working on, because if we assume that we're teaching to so that students can get jobs in like these tech workforces, like you're not just creating technologies for a project that's never going to leave your computer. You're creating these technologies for real world problems. So I think integrating like any way we can integrate how these technologies or how these algorithms can affect people or what biases can be put into these algorithms. I think that's something that can pretty seamlessly like be integrated into computer science like curriculum.
Other thoughts on that one? All right, so I know that representation, I think Kiara, you mentioned kind of in class showing examples is one way to start to incorporate student identities, especially marginalized ones, into the class. But what are other ways that you all have seen just the diverse spectrum of identities incorporated into actual course assignments or projects?
Yeah, I can speak on this from my own experience in designing my own curriculum. So I mentioned integrating culturally responsive pedagogy for some of my lessons that we do. And I guess what this might look like, for example, one of the assignments was, this is for middle and high school level demographic for context, was to just for students to pick any sort of problem that they want to solve and create a technology or revise a existing technology to address it. And, having that open-ended question, students really gravitated to their own interests, their own hobbies, their own identities. So, maybe making projects and assignments open-ended in that way to really, leverage the student voice or have them be able to talk about their identities in a way that they're most comfortable with. And another aspect is, thinking about peer-to-peer discussion or reflection or revision, where students also have a safe space to maybe talk with their own peers and learn from each other, from their own identities, interests, and backgrounds, and anything along those lines. And I feel like being able to do that would definitely leverage personal point of views from students and be able to integrate that sort of identity inclusive notion into what they're already working on.
Other experiences and projects or assignments that you all have had?
I think that like having a section, like an embedded section every course, even if it's like a technical course, that's related to ethics or discussing the ethics or discussing especially like the social or societal impact of the technology, because like every piece of technology, it doesn't matter how technical, if it has a real world application, it has a real world effect. And so I think like discussing those and having your voice and having your perspective and your side, especially your identity, included in those conversations is a good way to have that.
Bridget, were you unmuting? I didn't want to. Okay. All right. So is there anything that any of our panelists wish they could have said, but maybe was not brought out by our choice in questions here? So any final thoughts?
I mean, I guess I can say one thing. Um, One thought I just had, and it was more in relating to just like as students or even as teachers, is just like mind your rhetoric, or at least like look at your mindset. So I noticed we talk a lot about like inclusivity and like accommodating like minorities in CS, but I also just want to like make it clear that there's ways to accommodate and then there's ways to like pity people. And sometimes we have to just be clear that like, we have to just make that distinction clear. And I think meeting people where they're at is a really important point. And I think that's where we should draw the line of like accommodating people.
Thought that I've had is just like how to like keep like hope that like your change is working, especially now that we have like a lot of like anti-DEI just across the country in like different fields. And that like something that someone told me is that like there's pushback against it because it's been working. And so like that, I don't know, that statement just like gives me like hope to like keep going and like keep like involving ourselves in like these initiatives that make things more inclusive, because it does really make a difference. And even though it seems like everyone's hating on it right now, it's still worth it, and it'll be worth it in the future.
All right. Well, I want to thank you all for your participation today, as well as your general contributions on the Student Advisory Board for AiiCE. It is always a pleasure learning from you and having opportunities to discuss your experiences and get great ideas, honestly, for what we should be doing. in our respective positions. I do want to tell our audience that our next webinar will be Tuesday, February 20th, from 5 to 6. And it will be spotlighting the experiences of our Cultural Competence in Computing Fellowship Program. So I encourage folks to register for that. And we look forward to seeing everybody next time. Thank you so much.